The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, its fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over the worn benches. Michael Reed shuffled through the double doors, wrists bound by cold steel cuffs, his steps uneven from a limp earned in a war most had forgotten. His grey hair, cropped close, framed a face carved by time, deep lines etched around eyes that once scanned Iraqi deserts for threats. A faded military coat, 2 sizes too large, hung from his gaunt frame, swallowing the broad shoulders that had once carried wounded men to safety. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. Case 47B, City of Newbridge versus Michael Reed. Charges: disturbing the peace, trespassing, resisting arrest. Michael's gaze remained fixed on the floor, his breath shallow. The weight of the room pressed against him, not the cuffs, not the charges, but the eyes of strangers judging a life they could not understand. He had faced enemy fire in Fallujah, felt the heat of explosions, heard the screams of brothers he could not save. Yet this moment, standing alone in a municipal courtroom, stripped him bare in a way no battlefield ever had. He was 69, a Marine staff sergeant turned ghost, haunting a city that no longer saw him. Judge Sarah Bennett sat elevated behind the bench, her dark robe a stark contrast to the pale walls. Her auburn hair was pulled into a tight bun, and her hazel eyes scanned the case file with practiced precision. At 47, she carried the poise of 2 decades on the bench, her reputation built on fairness and a quiet intensity that commanded respect. But as her fingers traced the name on the docket, Michael Reed, her breath caught. The letters stirred a memory buried beneath years of grief, a name whispered in her brother's letters from Iraq. Her hand paused, hovering over the page, and for a moment, the courtroom's hum faded. Was it him? The man who had carried Thomas to safety, only to vanish into the fog of war. She forced her gaze upward, studying the defendant. Michael's slouched posture, his weathered coat, his refusal to meet her eyes, it all screamed defeat. Yet there was something in the set of his jaw, a flicker of defiance that reminded her of the Marine her brother had described. She adjusted her glasses, masking the tremor in her fingers. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice steady but laced with an edge she could not fully conceal. "Please state your name for the record." Michael cleared his throat, the sound rough, like gravel shifting. "Michael Reed, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired." His words were soft, almost swallowed by the room, but they landed with the weight of decades. A murmur rippled through the gallery. A few veterans, a silver-haired man in a Marine League jacket, a young woman clutching a notepad. Sarah's pen froze mid-note. The title, the cadence of his voice, echoed the stories Thomas had written home about a sergeant who defied death to save his men. The prosecutor, a young man named Ethan Carter, rose with a polished ease. His suit was crisp, his voice rehearsed. "Your Honor, the defendant has been cited multiple times for loitering behind Jefferson Street Cafe. The owner filed 3 complaints this month alone. On the night of January 12th, Officer Daniel Hayes found Mr. Reed at 11:45 p.m., refusing to vacate the premises when ordered." Ethan's tone was firm, but his eyes flicked to Michael with a trace of pity. "This is his 3rd citation this year. We recommend 30 days of community service and a no trespass order for downtown Newbridge." Sarah's jaw tightened. A no trespass order would ban Michael from the 4th Street shelter, the only refuge he had against the city's brutal winter. It would cut him off from the church meals that kept him alive. She glanced at Michael, searching for a reaction, but he remained still, his hands clasped tightly, knuckles white. The prosecutor's words painted him as a nuisance, a shadow to be swept away. But Sarah saw something else, a man eroded by time, yet unbowed by it. "Mr. Reed," she said, leaning forward, "do you have legal representation today?" Her question was procedural, but her tone carried a quiet urgency, as if willing him to fight. Michael shook his head, his voice barely audible. "No, ma'am. My public defender had another case." His eyes flicked up briefly, meeting hers for the first time. They were grey, clouded with exhaustion, but beneath the weariness lay a spark of something unbroken. Sarah's heart clenched. She remembered Thomas's letters, his admiration for a sergeant who never left a man behind. Could this broken figure be that same hero? "Would you like to speak on your own behalf?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost personal. The courtroom stilled, sensing a shift in the air. Michael hesitated, his lips parting as if weighing the cost of words. "No excuses, ma'am," he said finally. "I just needed to stay warm." "The cafe's alley vent. It's warm there. Ryan, the cook. He leaves food sometimes. Known him since he was a kid. His father served with me." His voice cracked on the last sentence, and he looked away, as if ashamed of revealing so much. Sarah's pen scratched a note, her mind racing. Ryan. A name to pursue, and the mention of service. Desert Storm, perhaps. She needed more. "Your military service, Mr. Reed," she said, breaking protocol. "Can you confirm the years and unit?" Michael straightened slightly, an instinct from decades past. "United States Marine Corps, 1975 to 1995. Staff Sergeant, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. Served in Vietnam, then Iraq." His words were clipped, precise, but they carried a pride he could not suppress. The silver-haired Marine in the gallery leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with recognition. Sarah's pulse quickened. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, the same unit as Thomas. She made a mark in the file, her hand steady despite the storm within. Before she could press further, the courtroom doors swung open. A man in a tailored navy suit strode in, his leather shoes clicking against the tile. He carried a briefcase, his posture radiating authority. The gallery stirred, whispers rising. "Your Honor," the man said, his voice calm but commanding. "David Walsh, attorney. I have just been retained to represent Mr. Reed. I apologize for the abruptness." He set his briefcase on the defense table and faced Sarah, his expression unreadable. Michael turned, confusion etching his face. He had not called a lawyer. He could not afford one, especially not a man whose cufflinks gleamed under the lights. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Walsh," she said. "The court was not informed of new representation." "A last-minute development," David replied, his tone smooth. "I respectfully request a brief recess to confer with my client." Sarah studied them both. Michael's bewilderment, David's quiet confidence. Something was amiss, but she could not place it. "This court will recess for 15 minutes, she said, rising. "Mr. Reed, remain with your counsel." She stepped into her chambers, her heart pounding. Behind her the courtroom buzzed, but all she could hear was the echo of her brother's words. "No Marine gets left behind. Not on his watch." The alley behind Jefferson Street Cafe reeked of grease and rotting trash, but to Michael Reed, it was sanctuary. On nights when the New Bridge winter sank its teeth into the city, the warm air from the cafe's exhaust vent offered a fleeting reprieve. He crouched there now, 3 weeks before his courtroom reckoning, his breath clouding in the frigid air. His fingers, calloused and trembling, clutched half a sandwich wrapped in foil. A gift from Ryan, the cook, slipped through the back door with a nod. Michael's eyes darted to the alley's mouth where streetlights cast long shadows. Loud noises, car horns, shouting, set his nerves ablaze, remnants of a war that never left him. He chewed slowly, savoring the warmth of the bread, knowing it might be hours before he ate again. The shelter on 4th Street was a mile away, and his bad knee, shattered by shrapnel in Fallujah, throbbed with every step. Still, he lingered, not for the food, but for the memory of Ryan's father, a lance corporal who had fought beside him in Desert Storm. That debt, unspoken, kept Michael tethered to this spot. A flashlight beam sliced through the dark, pinning him against the brick wall. "Hey, you!" an officer barked, his boots crunching on gravel. "Move it." "You know you can't stay here." Michael's heart raced, his body tensing as if under fire. He raised a hand, shielding his eyes. "Just finishing this, sir," he said, voice low. "5 minutes, please." The officer, young and impatient, scoffed. "You've had warnings. Get up, or I'm citing you." Michael nodded, stuffing the sandwich into his coat. He rose, joints screaming, and limped toward the street, the officer's gaze burning into his back. He did not argue. Words had stopped mattering years ago, when his wife left, when his benefits vanished in bureaucratic limbo, when the world decided he was invisible. Inside her chambers, Sarah Bennett sat alone, the courtroom's hum muffled by the heavy oak door. Her glasses rested on the desk, beside a case file that felt like a grenade in her hands. Michael Reed. The name clawed at her, dragging up memories she had buried beneath years of judicial restraint. She opened her drawer and withdrew a photograph, its edges soft from time. In it, she stood beside her brother, Thomas Bennett, his marine dress uniform crisp, his smile wide with the reckless optimism of youth. They were at his commissioning, a moment before Iraq stole him away. Next to the photo lay his final letter, its ink faded, but its words sharp. "Staff Sergeant Reed ran through hell to pull me out. He's the best of us, Sarah. If I can be half the man he is, I'll have done something right." Her fingers traced Thomas's handwriting, her chest tightening. She had spent 2 decades searching for the sergeant he described, the Marine who had given her family 2 extra weeks with Thomas before an IED ended his life. The military had told her he was discharged, lost to PTSD, and a system that failed its own. Now, he sat in her courtroom, charged with crimes born of desperation. She pressed her palms to her eyes, willing her emotions to settle. As a judge, she was bound by impartiality, but as Thomas's sister, she burned with a need to know the truth. Could she preside over this case without bias? The ethical line was razor-thin, and she stood on its edge. A knock startled her. The bailiff poked his head in. "Counsel's here, Your Honor. Recess is almost up." Sarah nodded, slipping the photo and letter back into the drawer. She straightened her robe, her face a mask of composure, but her pulse betrayed her. If Michael was the man from Thomas's letters, she could not let him slip away again. But what if her judgment clouded? What if she failed him as the system had? Back in the courtroom, Michael sat beside David Walsh, the lawyer who had appeared like a specter. David's suit was immaculate, his dark hair streaked with silver, his voice smooth as polished stone. "You do not need to worry about payment," he said, leaning close. "My firm, Walsh and Bennett, is handling this pro bono." Michael's brow furrowed. Bennett. The same name as the judge. He opened his mouth to question, but David raised a hand. "We have little time. Tell me why you were behind the cafe. Every detail." Michael's throat tightened. Speaking felt like exposing a wound. "It is warm there," he said. "The vent. Ryan, the cook, he leaves food sometimes. His father, John, served with me. I do not beg. I just stay out of sight." His voice faltered, shame creeping in. He had led men through ambushes, earned a silver star, yet here he was, justifying his existence to a stranger. David's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. "You mentioned Desert Storm. Any other deployments?" Michael hesitated, memories of Fallujah flashing, gunfire, blood. Thomas Bennett's voice shouting to leave him behind. "Vietnam," he said. "Then Iraq, 2004. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines." David scribbled a note, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said. "That gives us something to work with." Across the room, the gallery buzzed with whispers. The silver-haired Marine in the back, his jacket adorned with pins, watched Michael closely, his fingers tapping his knee. Ethan Carter, the prosecutor, shuffled papers, his earlier confidence shaken by David's arrival. The courtroom doors opened, and Sarah returned, her stride purposeful. She took her seat, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on Michael. For a moment their eyes locked, and Michael felt a jolt, as if she saw through the years to the man he had been. "Mr. Walsh," Sarah said, her voice formal but taut. "Have you conferred with your client?" David rose, buttoning his jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. We request a dismissal of all charges." Mr. Reed was not trespassing. He had implied permission from cafe staff to be on the premises, and his presence posed no threat. Ethan stood, his objection sharp. "Your Honor, the owner filed multiple complaints. Permission or not, the defendant ignored police orders." Sarah's hand raised, silencing Ethan. "I have questions for the defendant," she said, her focus shifting to Michael. "Mr. Reed, your file mentions Fallujah, 2004. Is that correct?" Michael's stomach churned. The name conjured dust and screams, the weight of Thomas Bennett in his arms. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice steady despite the memories. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes searching his. "And on April 17th, were you part of an operation near the city's western edge?" Michael's breath hitched. How did she know? "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We were escorting a convoy." "Got ambushed." His words were clipped, but his hands trembled, betraying the cost of recollection. Sarah's pen scratched another note, her face unreadable, but her heart raced. It was him, the man who had saved Thomas. Before she could ask more, David leaned toward Michael, whispering, "Stay focused. She is testing something." Michael nodded, but his mind was in Fallujah, reliving the moment he had dragged Thomas to cover, bullets snapping past his ears. In the gallery, the silver-haired Marine gripped his armrest, his eyes fixed on Michael with a mix of recognition and awe. Sarah's voice cut through the tension. "This court will recess for another 10 minutes, she said, rising abruptly. "Mr. Reed, remain here." She stepped into her chambers, her composure fraying. Behind her, the courtroom erupted in murmurs, and Michael sat frozen, the weight of her questions pressing against his chest. Why did she care about Fallujah? And who was this lawyer, tied to her name, fighting for a man he did not know? The air in Fallujah was thick with dust and cordite, the sun a merciless blaze overhead. Michael Reed crouched behind a shattered wall, his M16 hot in his hands, the chatter of gunfire deafening. April 17th, 2004. His squad, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, had been escorting a supply convoy when the ambush hit. Insurgents swarmed from rooftops, their AK-47s spitting rounds that kicked up dirt and blood. Michael's eyes scanned the chaos, locking on Lieutenant Thomas Bennett, sprawled in the open, clutching a wounded medic. Thomas's voice, hoarse but defiant, shouted, "Get the others! Leave me!" Michael's jaw clenched. No Marine gets left behind, not on his watch. He sprinted through the kill zone, bullets snapping past, and hauled Thomas to cover, his own shoulder burning from a grazing round. The memory seared Michael's mind, vivid as the courtroom he now sat in, its sterile lights a world away from that desert hell. Back in Newbridge, the courtroom hummed with tension, the gallery's whispers a low buzz. Michael's hands gripped the edge of the defense table, his knuckles white, as Judge Sarah Bennett's question about Fallujah lingered like smoke. His gray eyes, clouded with decades of pain, flicked to the floor, avoiding the weight of her gaze. He could still feel Thomas's weight in his arms, the lieutenant's blood soaking his uniform. Had Sarah known Thomas? The thought gnawed at him, a puzzle he could not solve. Sarah sat behind the bench, her face a mask of judicial calm, but her pulse thrummed with urgency. Michael's confirmation of the Fallujah ambush had cracked open a door to her past. Her brother's letters described that day in vivid detail. A sergeant who charged through gunfire, saving 6 men, including Thomas. The service record in Michael's file matched perfectly. 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, Silver Star for April 17th, 2004. Yet doubt lingered. Could this broken man, slouched in a borrowed coat, be the hero Thomas had revered? She needed certainty, not just for justice, but for the grief she had carried since Thomas's death. "Mr. Reed," Sarah said, her voice steady but probing, "during that ambush in Fallujah, did you rescue a wounded officer, Lieutenant Thomas Bennett, under enemy fire?" The question cut through the courtroom like a blade, silencing the murmurs. Michael's breath caught, his eyes narrowing as the name landed. Thomas Bennett. The young lieutenant, brave and stubborn, who had begged Michael to save the others first. Memories flooded back. Thomas's pale face, his voice cracking as he ordered Michael to leave him. Michael had ignored him, dragging him to safety, then covering the squad's retreat. "Yes, ma'am," Michael said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "Lieutenant Bennett took a hit trying to pull a medic out. I reached him, got him behind cover. He kept shouting to help the others, to leave him behind." His words trailed off, and he looked down, shame creeping in. For years, he had wondered if saving Thomas had been futile, a cruel delay before the IED that claimed him weeks later. Sarah's pen froze mid-note, her chest tightening. The courtroom faded, and she was back at Thomas's funeral, the folded flag heavy in her hands, her parents' silent sobs echoing. A Marine had approached her then, his voice choked. "Your brother saved my life. I was the one he carried." She had never forgotten his name, though the military later told her he was gone, lost to PTSD and a broken system. Now, he sat before her, his words confirming what her heart already knew. In the gallery, a silver-haired man in a Marine League jacket stood abruptly, his weathered face taut with recognition. "That's him," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Staff Sergeant Reed. I was there. He saved 6 of us that day." The room stirred, heads turning. The man's eyes, sharp despite his age, locked on Michael, a mix of awe and gratitude in them. "He took fire pulling the lieutenant out, then went back for the rest." Sarah's gavel tapped once, a reflex to restore order, but her usual authority wavered. "Order," she said, her voice softer than intended. The gallery settled, but the silver-haired Marine remained standing, his posture rigid, as if saluting a long-lost brother. Ethan Carter, the prosecutor, shifted uncomfortably, his earlier confidence eroding. He opened his mouth to object, but Sarah's raised hand stopped him cold. "Mr. Reed," Sarah continued, her focus unwavering, "what became of Lieutenant Bennett after you rescued him?" Her question was formal, but her eyes betrayed a personal stake, a flicker of vulnerability that Michael caught. He swallowed hard, the memory of Thomas's fate a weight he had carried for 2 decades. "We got him on the medevac," Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Heard he made it to Germany, but a few weeks later, his convoy hit an IED. His voice cracked, and he clenched his fists, fighting the guilt that had festered since. "For years, I wondered if saving him just delayed things. Maybe made it worse." The courtroom stilled, the weight of his words settling over the room. Sarah's composure nearly broke, her brother's final letter flashing in her mind. "Reed did something yesterday I'll never forget. He's why I'm still here." She wanted to tell Michael that those extra weeks had mattered, that Thomas's letters had kept their family whole a little longer. But she was a judge, bound by duty, not a sister seeking closure. David Walsh leaned toward Michael, his voice low. "You did your duty. Let that be enough for now." Michael nodded, but his eyes remained distant, lost in the sands of Fallujah. David rose, addressing Sarah. "Your Honor, Mr. Reed's service is a testament to his character. We ask the court to consider this context in evaluating the charges." Ethan stood, his tone measured but strained. "Your Honor, while Mr. Reed's military record is commendable, it does not negate the charges. He violated city ordinances and ignored police orders." His argument felt hollow, overshadowed by the silver-haired Marine's outburst and Michael's raw testimony. Sarah's gaze shifted to the gallery, where the silver-haired Marine still stood, his presence a silent challenge to Ethan's words. She recognized him now. Gunnery Sergeant Robert Hayes, a veteran advocate who had spoken at her Veterans Court program. His testimony carried weight, and his recognition of Michael was a spark that could ignite the truth. But she needed more than courtroom drama. She needed proof, and a plan to ensure Michael did not vanish again. "This court will recess for 15 minutes, Sarah said, her voice firm despite the storm within. "Mr. Reed, remain with counsel. Bailiff, ensure the gallery maintains decorum." She rose, her robe swishing, and retreated to her chambers, her mind racing. She had to contact Colonel Matthews, Thomas's old commander, to verify Michael's actions and service record. If Michael was the hero her brother described, she would not let him face this alone. But the ethical line loomed. Could she balance justice with the debt she owed him? As the courtroom buzzed, Michael sat frozen, the silver-haired Marine's words echoing in his ears. Someone remembered. After years of sidewalks and shadows, someone had seen him. He glanced at David, whose calm demeanor hid a fierce determination. "Why are you doing this?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse. "You do not know me." David's eyes met his, steady and resolute. "I knew Thomas Bennett," he said. "And I know Sarah. That is enough." Michael's breath hitched, the pieces of the puzzle shifting, but the picture remained incomplete. Outside, the Newbridge winter pressed against the windows, its cold a reminder of the nights he had endured. But for the first time in years, a spark of hope flickered, fragile but alive. Sarah Bennett's chambers were a sanctuary of order, the oak desk polished to a gleam, legal texts lined with precision on mahogany shelves. But as she closed the door behind her, The weight of Michael Reed's testimony shattered her composure. She sank into her chair, her hands trembling as she pulled out the photograph of her brother, Thomas, his Marine uniform crisp, his smile a fleeting moment of joy, before Iraq claimed him. The letter beside it, worn thin from years of quiet grief, held his words about Staff Sergeant Reed. He moved through enemy fire like it didn't exist. I'm alive because of him. Sarah's chest tightened, the past colliding with the present. Michael's weathered face, his halting voice in the courtroom, confirmed he was the man Thomas had revered. But as a judge, she faced an ethical precipice. Could she remain impartial when her heart demanded justice for the man who had saved her brother? She pressed her fingers to her temples, the hum of the courtroom beyond the door, a distant roar. Recusing herself was the prudent choice. No one would question it, given her personal connection. Yet the thought of abandoning Michael to another judge, one who might see only a homeless veteran and not the hero beneath, was unbearable. He had slipped through the system's cracks once, evicted, benefits denied, left to freeze in alleys. She would not let him disappear again. Her gaze fell to the phone on her desk. Colonel James Matthews, Thomas's old commander, could verify Michael's actions in Fallujah and his service record. If she could secure official recognition, it might sway the court without compromising her role. But time was short, and the risk of bias loomed. A knock broke her reverie. David Walsh stepped inside, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the room's solemnity. His dark eyes, sharp with concern, studied her. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, using her first name as only a lifelong friend could. "What is this about? You're shaking." David had been her late husband's law partner, a steady presence through her grief and her rise to the bench. He knew her better than most, which made his scrutiny unnerving. "It's him, David," she said, gesturing to the photograph. "Michael Reed. The Marine who saved Thomas in Fallujah. The one I've been searching for." She handed him Thomas's letter, her voice unsteady. "His service record matches. Silver Star, April 17th, 2004. Same unit, same day." David scanned the letter, his expression shifting from curiosity to realization. "The homeless veteran in your courtroom?" He paused, his voice dropping. "You're sure it's the same man?" Sarah nodded, her throat tight. He confirmed the ambush, the rescue. Even the silver-haired Marine in the gallery, Gunnery Sergeant Hayes, recognized him. David set the letter down, his brow furrowing. "This complicates things. You could recuse yourself. No one would blame you." His tone was gentle but firm, a lawyer's instinct for procedure. "The ethical risk is real. If the prosecutor senses bias, he could appeal any ruling." "I know," Sarah said, her voice sharp with resolve. "But I'm not letting Michael vanish again. He's endured enough. PTSD, a traumatic brain injury, his wife leaving, his benefits lost. He deserves better than a system that forgets its own." She stood, pacing to the window. Outside, Newbridge's skyline glittered under a grey winter sky, indifferent to the man fighting for survival below. David leaned against the desk, his calm demeanor a counterpoint to her fire. "I spoke with Michael. He's proud but broken, thinks he's a burden. His injuries, physical and mental, made work impossible after his discharge. Construction jobs dried up, then eviction, then the streets." He hesitated, choosing his words. "He doesn't know who you are, Sarah. Your married name hides the connection. But if you push this in court, it'll come out." Sarah's jaw tightened. She had taken her husband's name, Bennett, after law school, a shield that now kept Michael from recognizing her as Thomas's sister. Good, she said. It gives me room to act without him suspecting favoritism. She turned to face David, her eyes fierce. I need you to dig into his VA records. Find out why his benefits were delayed. And I'm calling Colonel Matthews. If we can prove his heroism officially, it might shift the case. David nodded, but his expression remained cautious. I'll handle the records. My firm's already committed pro bono. But be careful, Sarah. You're walking a tightrope. He straightened, adjusting his cufflinks. I took this case because of Thomas. He was my friend, too. If Michael's the man who saved him, I'm all in. Sarah managed a small smile, gratitude tempering her tension. Thank you, David. As he left, she picked up the phone, her fingers steady despite the storm within. Colonel Matthews, it's Sarah Bennett, she said when the call connected. I need a favor, and it's urgent. It's about a Marine from your old unit, Staff Sergeant Michael Reed. In the courtroom, Michael sat beside David's empty chair, the recess stretching like an eternity. The gallery's whispers had faded, but the silver-haired Marine, Robert Hayes, watched him from across the room, his gaze heavy with unspoken history. Michael's hands fidgeted, his bad knee throbbing under the table. David's words, about knowing Thomas, had stirred something in him, a flicker of connection to a past he had buried. He closed his eyes, and Fallujah returned. The crack of gunfire, Thomas's voice, the weight of duty. But other memories followed. His wife's goodbye letter, the foreclosure notice, the first night sleeping on concrete. His PTSD, a shadow that never slept, turned every loud noise into an ambush, every stranger into a threat. David returned, sliding into the seat beside him. Sarah's pushing for answers, he said quietly. She asked about Fallujah for a reason. Stay sharp. Michael's brow furrowed. Why does she care? It's just a trespass charge. David's eyes met his, steady but guarded. It's more than that. Trust me. Michael wanted to press, but the bailiff's voice cut through. All rise. Sarah swept back to the bench, her posture flawless, but her hands betrayed a slight tremor as she adjusted her papers. The courtroom settled, the air thick with anticipation. Michael's gaze flicked to her, searching for a clue to her intensity. Did she know Thomas? Was that why she probed his past? Mr. Walsh, Sarah said, her voice formal but taut. Has your client prepared a response to the charges? David rose, his presence commanding. Yes, Your Honor. We maintain that Mr. Reed had permission to be on the cafe's premises and posed no harm. His military service and current circumstances warrant leniency. Ethan Carter stood, his tone sharper now. Your Honor, the defendant's service, while honorable, doesn't excuse repeated violations. The city has a duty to enforce its laws. His words were firm, but his eyes flicked to Michael, a trace of doubt creeping in. Sarah's gaze shifted to Michael, her expression unreadable. Mr. Reed, she said, your actions in Fallujah suggest a man of courage. But I need to understand why you chose that alley, why you resisted leaving. Her question was a lifeline, but it carried a weight Michael could not name. He cleared his throat, his voice low. It's warm there, ma'am. Ryan's been kind. I don't cause trouble. When the officer came, I asked for a moment to finish eating. Didn't mean to resist. His words were honest, but they felt inadequate. A plea from a man who had once commanded respect. Sarah nodded, her pen scratching a note. She wanted to ask more, to unravel the years between Fallujah and this moment, but the clock was ticking. Colonel Matthews had promised to check Michael's records, but she needed time. "This court will reconvene in 1 hour," she said, rising. "Mr. Reed, remain with counsel." As she stepped into her chambers, her heart pounded. She was risking her career, but for Thomas, for Michael, she would see this through. The courtroom doors swung open, and a hush fell over the gallery as 3 Marines stepped inside, their uniforms crisp, their presence electric. Colonel James Matthews led the way, his silver hair catching the fluorescent light, his chest adorned with ribbons that spoke of decades of service. Behind him followed a master sergeant, her posture rigid with discipline, and a young corporal carrying a polished wooden case, its contents hidden but heavy with significance. Michael Reed stood instinctively, his bad knee protesting, but his spine straightened as if muscle memory had erased the years. The sight of those uniforms stirred something deep within him. Pride, duty, a life he had thought forgotten. His grey eyes, clouded with exhaustion, flickered with a spark of the Marine he had been. Judge Sarah Bennett took her seat, her dark robe settling around her like armor, but her hands trembled as she set aside her glasses. For the first time in her judicial career, she felt the weight of her role not as a shield, but as a bridge between past and present. Michael's testimony, the silver-haired Marine's outburst, and Colonel Matthews' confirmation over the phone had solidified the truth. Michael Reed was the man who had saved her brother Thomas in Fallujah. Now she stood at a crossroads, uphold the law or honor a debt that transcended it. Her gaze met Michael's, and for a moment the courtroom faded, leaving only the echo of Thomas's words. "No Marine gets left behind." "Before we proceed," Sarah said, her voice clear but thick with emotion, "I must disclose a personal connection to this case." Gasps rippled through the gallery, the prosecutor, Ethan Carter, stiffening in his seat. Sarah looked directly at Michael, her hazel eyes wet but resolute. "Lieutenant Thomas Bennett, mentioned in earlier testimony, was my brother." The room erupted in murmurs, heads turning, the silver-haired Marine, Robert Hayes, nodding as if he had suspected as much. Michael's brow furrowed, recognition dawning, his breath catching as the pieces fell into place. Sarah continued, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. 20 years ago, Thomas wrote home about a staff sergeant who saved his life in Fallujah. On April 17, 2004, this man ran through enemy fire to rescue him, then covered his unit's retreat, saving 5 others. Her eyes never left Michael's. That man was Staff Sergeant Michael Reed. The courtroom stilled, the weight of her words settling like snow. Michael's jaw clenched, his composure cracking as decades of buried pride and pain surfaced. From the gallery, Robert Hayes stepped forward, his voice firm. "It's true. I saw it." Reed took 2 rounds, pulling the lieutenant out, then went back for the rest. His words carried the weight of a battlefield, and the gallery stirred, veterans and civilians alike leaning forward, caught in the gravity of the moment. Sarah gave a small nod, then gestured to Colonel Matthews. "Colonel, you have something to share." Matthews stepped to the bench, his presence commanding silence. "Staff Sergeant Reed," he began, his voice resonant, "the Marine Corps has been searching for you. Under the Veterans Reconsideration Initiative, your personnel file was reviewed. New intelligence from your 2004 deployment warranted an update to your commendations." The corporal opened the wooden case, revealing a medal on deep blue velvet, its star-shaped design glinting under the lights. "By order of the Secretary of the Navy," Matthews announced. "In recognition of extraordinary bravery on April 17, 2004, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Michael Reed, United States Marine Corps." Gasps echoed. The Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor, carrying a reverence that silenced the room. "Your Silver Star has been upgraded," Matthews added. "Your actions disrupted an ambush that could have wiped out the convoy. You saved not just 6 lives, but dozens." Michael's eyes widened, his voice barely audible. "There must be some mistake. I just did my job." His words were a reflex, a shield against the honor he felt unworthy of. Matthews shook his head, his tone resolute. "No mistake, Sergeant. This is long overdue." From the gallery, Robert Hayes's voice rang out, crisp and authoritative. "Attention on deck." Veterans stood first, their postures snapping to attention, followed by others, civilians, court staff, even Ethan Carter, caught between protocol and awe. One by one they saluted Michael, the room rising in a wave of respect. Sarah wiped at her eyes, her judicial mask gone, her voice shaking as she spoke. "In light of these developments, all charges against Staff Sergeant Michael Reed are dismissed, permanently." Her gavel struck with force, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "This courtroom is adjourned." The gallery erupted, murmurs swelling into applause, but Michael stood frozen, the weight of the moment overwhelming. The Master Sergeant approached, a tablet in hand. "Sir, your VA records have been corrected. You're now 100% service-connected, retroactive to your discharge. Full back pay, medical coverage, housing assistance, everything you're entitled to." Michael blinked, stunned. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "It means you're taken care of," David Walsh said, stepping forward, his calm demeanor masking fierce determination. "My firm will ensure every detail is processed. No more delays." Michael's gaze darted between David and the Marines, his mind struggling to grasp the shift. For years, he had been invisible, a shadow surviving on scraps. Now, the world saw him. Sarah stepped down from the bench, her robe trailing as she approached Michael. The distance between judge and defendant dissolved, leaving only a woman and the man who had given her 2 more weeks with her brother. "My brother wrote about you," she said softly, her voice thick. "He said you refused to leave him, even when he begged. Those weeks he lived, they mattered." "To him, to us." Michael's eyes glistened, his throat tight. He had carried guilt for Thomas's death, wondering if his rescue had been a cruel delay. Sarah's words lifted that burden, if only a fraction. "I never stopped searching for you," Sarah continued, her hand resting briefly on his arm. "After Thomas died, I tried to find you, but the Marine Corps said you'd been discharged. No one knew where you went. Today, whether by fate or something higher, you're here." Michael stood silent, every emotion, grief, pride, disbelief, etched across his weathered face. The courtroom began to empty, but the Marines remained, their presence a silent vow. David leaned close, his voice low. "There's more to come, Michael. Housing, benefits, a fresh start. We'll make this right." Michael nodded, but his eyes lingered on Sarah, the sister of the lieutenant he had carried through hell. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a vagrant, but as a man who had mattered. As Sarah returned to her chambers, her heart pounded, a mix of catharsis and exhaustion. She had risked her career, but for Thomas, for Michael, it was worth it. Outside, the Newbridge winter pressed against the windows, its cold no match for the warmth of a promise kept. Michael stood taller, the Navy Cross a weight he was not yet ready to carry, but one he would learn to bear. Someone had remembered his name, and in that moment, a spark of dignity reignited, fragile but fierce. Michael Reed stood in the quiet of his new apartment, the air smelling faintly of fresh paint and possibility. The walls were bare, save for a single frame above the modest couch, a display of his Navy Cross, flanked by his long-lost Purple Hearts and service medals, recovered by David Walsh from a storage locker sold off years ago. Sunlight filtered through a small window, casting a warm glow on the hardwood floor, a stark contrast to the frozen alleys he had called home. At 69, Michael felt the weight of this new life like a borrowed uniform, unfamiliar yet heavy with meaning. His bad knee ached as he adjusted a chair, but his hands, once trembling with cold, were steady now. The Veterans Housing Initiative had moved him in 2 days ago, and though the silence of the space unnerved him, it was a silence he could claim. He ran his fingers over the Navy Cross, its star-shaped weight a reminder of the courtroom's reckoning. The memory of that day, Colonel Matthew's voice, Sarah Bennett's tears, the gallery's salute, played in his mind like a reel he could not pause. For years, he had believed his sacrifices were forgotten, his name erased by a system that discarded its own. Now the world had turned, and he stood on the edge of something he had not dared to hope for. A second chance. But hope was a fragile thing, and Michael's PTSD, a shadow that clung to him, whispered doubts. Could he live up to this honor? Or would he falter, as he had when his wife left, when his benefits vanished, when the streets became his only refuge? A knock at the door jolted him. He opened it to find Ryan, the cook from Jefferson Street Cafe, standing in the hall, his apron swapped for a clean jacket, his young face etched with emotion. "Mr. Reed," Ryan said, his voice thick, "I heard you got a place. Wanted to see it for myself." Michael stepped aside, gesturing him in. Ryan's eyes widened at the sight of the medals, his gaze lingering on the Navy Cross. "My dad used to talk about you," he said, his voice soft. "Said you saved his whole platoon in Desert Storm. Told me if I ever met a Marine named Michael Reed, I owed him everything." Michael's throat tightened. Ryan's father, John, had been a lance corporal with a quick laugh, a man who never flinched under fire. "Your dad was a good Marine," Michael said, his voice rough. "I just did what needed doing." Ryan shook his head, tears brimming. "I never knew it was you, not until the courtroom. Those sandwiches. I wish I'd done more." He reached out a hand, his grip firm. "I'm sorry, sir, for everything." Michael clasped Ryan's hand, the gesture grounding him. "You kept me going, son," he said. "That's more than enough." Ryan's apology, raw and earnest, chipped away at the wall Michael had built around his heart. For years, he had felt like a ghost, unseen by the city he had served. Now, Ryan's presence, his inherited gratitude, was a tether to the past that had shaped him. Later that afternoon, Michael sat across from David Walsh in the apartment's small kitchen, a stack of paperwork between them. David's suit was less formal today, his sleeves rolled up, but his intensity remained. "Your VA benefits are fully processed," he said, sliding a document forward. "Back pay's coming, 6 figures, retroactive to your discharge. Medical coverage, housing support, educational benefits if you want them." He tapped the page. "My firm's handling the details." No red tape, no delays. Michael stared at the numbers, his mind struggling to grasp the shift. 6 figures? He asked, his voice barely audible. He had survived on scraps, on Ryan's sandwiches, on the warmth of a cafe vent. The idea of financial security felt like a language he had forgotten. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his eyes searching David's. "You didn't know me before the courtroom." David leaned back, his expression softening. "I knew Thomas Bennett," he said. "He was my friend in college, before he joined the Marines. When Sarah told me about you, about Fallujah, I couldn't walk away. You gave her family time with him. That's a debt I can't repay. But I can damn well try." His voice carried a quiet fierceness, a loyalty that mirrored Michael's own. Michael nodded, the weight of David's words settling over him. He had saved Thomas, yes, but he had also lost so much. His marriage, his health, his place in the world. David's commitment, like Ryan's apology, was a step toward reclaiming what had been taken. "Thank you," Michael said, the words inadequate but sincere. As David gathered his papers, a third visitor arrived. Ethan Carter, the prosecutor, standing awkwardly in the doorway. His suit was crisp, but his posture lacked its former confidence. "Mr. Reed," he said, his voice tentative, "I owe you an apology. I didn't know your story in court. I should have looked deeper." He extended a hand, his eyes meeting Michael's with genuine remorse. "What you did in Fallujah, what you've been through, I had no idea. I'm sorry." Michael studied Ethan, the young man who had once painted him as a nuisance. He saw no malice, only a humbling born of truth. "You were doing your job," Michael said, shaking his hand. "I've had worse." A faint smile crossed his face, the first in years, and Ethan exhaled, as if released from a burden. Alone again, Michael stood by the window, watching the Newbridge skyline fade into dusk. The city, once a labyrinth of cold alleys and indifference, now held allies. Ryan, David, Ethan, even Sarah. The courtroom had not just dismissed his charges. It had rewritten his story, giving voice to a past he had buried. But the Navy Cross on the wall felt heavy, a symbol of a man he was not sure he could be again. His PTSD, triggered by loud noises or sudden movements, still lurked, a reminder of battles fought and lost. Could he build a life here, or would the shadows reclaim him? He thought of Sarah, her voice in the courtroom, her hand on his arm as she spoke of Thomas. She had searched for him, carried his name through years of grief. That knowledge, more than the medals or the apartment, anchored him. Someone had remembered, and that memory was a spark he could nurture. Outside, the first snowflakes of the evening drifted down, soft and steady, covering the city in a quiet promise. Michael's breath fogged the glass, and for the first time in decades, he felt the stirrings of a future, fragile, but his to claim. Michael Reed sat in the modest living room of his new apartment, the Navy Cross gleaming in its frame above the couch, a silent testament to a life reclaimed. The space was sparse but warm, the hardwood floor catching the soft glow of a single lamp. At 69, he felt the weight of decades in his bones. Vietnam, Iraq, the streets of Newbridge. But tonight, something lighter stirred within him. His hands, once trembling from cold and fear, rested steady on his knees. The city outside hummed with life, its winter breath seeping through the window. But for the first time in years, Michael was not fighting to survive it. A knock at the door broke the quiet, and he rose, his bad knee protesting, but his posture firm, a Marine's instinct never fully lost. Sarah Bennett stood in the hallway, her judicial robe replaced by a simple coat, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. She held a small wooden box, her hazel eyes warm, but tinged with the weight of shared history. "May I come in, Sergeant Reed?" she asked, her voice soft, stripped of courtroom formality. Michael stepped aside, a faint smile crossing his weathered face. "Just Michael is fine," he said, gesturing to the couch. "Then it's just Sarah," she replied, stepping inside. her presence filling the room with a quiet reverence. They sat across from each other, the silence thick with the ghosts of Fallujah and the brother who bound them. Sarah set the box on the coffee table, her fingers lingering on its worn surface. "I brought something," she said, opening it to reveal a bundle of letters, their edges frayed, tied with a faded ribbon. "They're from Thomas. He wrote us every week while he was deployed." She handed one to Michael, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "This one mentions you. It's dated the day after you saved him." Michael's hands trembled as he unfolded the letter, Thomas's handwriting sharp and clear, a voice from a past he had tried to bury. "Mom, Dad, Sarah," he read aloud, his voice rough. "Don't worry about the news. I'm safe, thanks to one of our NCOs. Staff Sergeant Reed did something yesterday I still can't believe. When our unit was ambushed, he moved through enemy fire like it didn't exist. Refused to leave me, even when I ordered him to. Said no Marine gets left behind." His voice cracked, and he paused, the weight of Thomas's words sinking in. For 20 years, he had carried guilt, wondering if his rescue had been a cruel delay before Thomas's death. Now, Thomas's own words absolved him. Sarah watched him, her eyes glistening. "He mentioned you often," she said quietly. "Said you were the Marine he looked up to. He was young, but he cared about his men." "That's rare." Michael nodded, his throat tight. "He was a good officer," he said softly. "Cared more about his people than himself. That's what got him hit. Trying to save that medic." His gaze drifted to the Navy Cross, its shine both a comfort and a challenge. Sarah followed his eyes, her voice gentle. "After Thomas died, I went to law school. The Veterans Court program, this housing initiative, it all started because of what he wrote, about how the system forgets its own." She hesitated, then met his gaze. "You're not a hero, Michael, because you think you are. You're a hero because you acted when no one else could." Michael shifted, uncomfortable with the word. "I just did what needed doing," he said, his voice low. "Lost more than I saved, in the end." His wife's departure, his benefits tangled in red tape, the years on the streets. They had convinced him his sacrifices were futile, his name forgotten. Sarah leaned forward, her voice firm. "That's what heroes always say. But Thomas didn't die because of you. He lived the way he did because of you." She pulled another letter from the box, this one dated days before Thomas's death. "His final mission," she said, "was to track insurgents targeting civilians. He volunteered for it, wrote that he wanted to live up to the example you set." The words hit Michael harder than any battlefield wound. For 2 decades he had wondered if saving Thomas had mattered, if his actions had rippled beyond that day in Fallujah. Sarah's voice, steady and sure, cut through the doubt. "He didn't just survive because of you," she said, reading his thoughts. "He became the man he was because of you." They sat in silence, 2 lives woven by service and sorrow. Outside, snow fell, blanketing Newbridge in a soft white hush. Michael's gaze drifted to the window, the city's lights blurred by the storm. "For years," he said, his voice barely audible, "sleeping on sidewalks, I thought no one remembered, like none of it mattered." His PTSD, triggered by car horns or sudden shouts, had convinced him he was alone, a relic of a war no one cared to recall. Sarah nodded, her hand resting on the letters. "It mattered," she said. "To Thomas, to every Marine you saved, to me." Her voice softened. A sister now, not a judge. Thomas used to say the measure of a Marine isn't what he does in front of a crowd, but what he does when no one's watching. You lived that, Michael, even when the world forgot. Michael's chest tightened, a warmth spreading through him, fragile but real. He stood, crossing to the window, his reflection faint against the glass. The man staring back was older, scarred, but taller than he had been in years, his shoulders squared with a quiet strength. "Someone remembered my name," he said softly, the words a prayer and a promise. "After all this time, someone remembered." Sarah rose, placing a hand on his shoulder, her touch light but grounding. "We won't forget again," she said, her voice a vow. As she stepped toward the door, she turned, her smile small but radiant. "No Marine gets left behind, not while I'm still breathing." The echo of Thomas's words, spoken by Michael in Fallujah, closed the circle between them. Alone again, Michael stood by the window, the snow falling thicker now, each flake a quiet absolution. The Navy Cross gleamed behind him, not a burden, but a beacon. His PTSD, his losses, his years of invisibility, they were not erased, but they no longer defined him. Ryan's gratitude, David's loyalty, Ethan's apology, Sarah's letters, they were threads in a tapestry of redemption, woven by a single truth. His sacrifices had mattered. In that moment, something long broken began to heal, not just in Michael Reed, but in every soul the system had overlooked. Some heroes save lives, then spend a lifetime waiting for someone to save theirs. But sometimes, dignity finds them, not in glory, but in the quiet grace of being remembered. Black, homeless veteran on trial. But when the judge reads his file, silence falls over the courtroom.